Hi, my name is Aya. You're watching Aya Reads, and I'm here to talk about my recent reads. So basically, I'm going to be talking about all the books I read for the first half of the month of May. So I had an interesting reading month with a lot of different ratings. I haven't found a favorite yet. I only had one 5-star, but it was basically like a short story, so I don't feel like that really counts. We'll get to that book at the end because, as always, I'm gonna start with my least favorite book and work my way up to my favorite book I read so far this month. My least favorite book I read actually was Yakuza Lover by Nozomi Mino. I read this book for the Mafia Romance Readathon, which I'll leave linked for you. And this is a manga following a woman who falls in love with a Yakuza. So Yakuza, for those of you who don't know, is Japanese mafia. And this book you follow Yuri, and she is a college student. A college student. She's at this party where a bunch of people are using drugs and they are threatening her. And then all of a sudden, this mysterious, handsome stranger shows up, and she finds out that he's part of the Yakuza, and this is basically their romance, and it's like the worst case of insta-love that I have ever seen. This just was not my favorite. The art was beautiful, but some of the, like when they were kissing and stuff, it was just like weird and it made me uncomfortable. I just didn't understand this couple. It was not my favorite. I don't think I would recommend it because I think it has 9 volumes and I truly do not understand what the rest of the volumes are going to be about, because this one tiny volume was them meeting each other, falling in love, and like declaring their love for each other. I feel like, especially in a manga that is gonna have multiple volumes, that just is not necessary. So this just was not my favorite. It was my least favorite book I read so far. My other 2-star read was unfortunately One Hot Italian Summer by Karina Halle. This book I read for a vlog I did that's gonna be coming out after this video. This book you follow Grace, I think. Yeah, Grace, who is an author, and she recently lost her co-author and her best friend. So she's been grieving, and she recently got picked up by another agent to start like her solo career as an author. But she has not really been able to write without her friend, and she lives in Scotland, so her agent suggests that she changes settings, and she actually has a house in Italy, and she suggests that Grace go to this house for a month to get some inspiration and to start writing. So she does, but when she gets there, it turns out that there are other people living there, mainly her agent's ex-husband and their son. There was this not really misunderstanding. He was supposed to be away for the summer for at least a month with his son, but due to like unforeseen circumstances, they couldn't go on this trip anymore, so they decided to stay. He invites her to stay with them for the month so that she could finish. He's an artist. He makes sculptures, and of course they fall in love. So he's Italian. This made me so very sad because I actually went to Italy and I read this book throughout my entire trip. And I do think that if I wasn't in Italy and this wasn't a book that I was wanting to read while I was in Italy, I would have probably DNF'd it. I had major issues with the writing style in this book. Like, I don't know what it was, and I cannot really pinpoint it because I'm not really good at that, like first person, present tense, stuff like that. I mean, I guess on the surface I could tell you what it is, but there was something about the writing style that bothered me. The characters constantly kept recapping things that we have already seen happen. Like, it just was annoying. The main character was very annoying to me, and everything felt very surface level. Like, the author never really spent any time discussing the characters' motivations, their characters' backstories. So they did mention things, but we never really got into it. Like, she keeps mentioning grieving her friend, but the only times we see her or she thinks about grieving is when it directly involves her writing. We never really discuss their actual friendship, which made it feel really cheap to me. And yes, there is a scene towards the end of the book where they discuss that people grieve in their own ways, which I get that, but to only grieve when you're writing and you're having trouble writing and never really grieving your friendship, it just made me very uncomfortable. Plus, this main character was very, very insecure. And once again, that is fine for a female character, but it was never really discussed why she was insecure. We only got an explanation that it has something to do with her father and him talking down to her, but we never really got into the meat of what exactly it was he said and what exactly made her insecure. She's a little bit of an older heroine, but to me, she read like 16. So that was just, I didn't really like that. Also, both of them were very wishy-washy, contradictory. Like, one chapter, they would say something, and then like literally a couple pages later or a chapter later, they would do something completely the opposite of that, which was just, once again, very annoying, and it made the characters not consistent at all. Like an example being that Claudio, who's the main male character, is saying that he had a possessive heart, which makes me think that, okay, so you've been in relationships before where you've had a possessive heart. But then the next chapter, he claims that he's never been in love. Well, then how do you know that you have a possessive heart? Like, it wouldn't matter if he said, like, I love you and you're like, I'm very possessive of you. But possessive heart to me implies that he's always been possessive no matter the relationship. I don't know. It's just like, and I don't know. Once again, not very consistent writing. But one big giant issue that I had was his son. So he has a son. And to me, the only reason this man has a son is for plot reasons, because this character didn't feel real to me. Like the son just felt like a two-dimensional cardboard cut out of a human and only used when it suited the plot. Like the only reason he needs a son is because if the agent and him did not share a son, then she would never have access to this house, because why would you have access to the house if, like, from a relationship like a decade ago, if you did not share a son? It also made the relationship very forbidden then, because the son didn't want them to be together, and obviously the agent doesn't want her client to be with her ex-husband, but also the father of her son, who she's gonna interact with a lot. This probably wouldn't have bothered me, or I wouldn't have noticed it if it was single point of view, but since it was dual point of view, it was glaringly clear to me that this was not like a real relationship between father and son, because we did get Claudio's perspective and we did get his thoughts, and in his thoughts, the only thing he thought about was his art and Grace. He rarely thought about his son. And also in the beginning of the book, Vonnie is blaming his dad for him having a boring summer. And usually I'm like, okay, well, I could see the dad side, but in this case, I could not see the dad side. And if I was Vonnie, I would have been way angrier, because they were supposed to be away for 4 weeks. They were supposed to be on vacation for 4 weeks. And because of something that happened on vacation, they had to go back. But then Claudio immediately went back to working, and then when it was not work, it was him trying to get in Grace's pants. And you know what he was not doing? Spending time with his son, which was the whole point of that trip. So, like, that is just bad parenting, in my opinion. Like, what was the point of that? Both characters got on my nerves, and I just, like, at the end of the day, I just felt really sorry for the son, who constantly kept spending time alone or being sent away for plot purposes. I do have to say, there are some things that made me not completely hated, because I did end up giving it 2 stars. One of the stars was definitely for the man on this cover, because this is one hot Italian guy, like, I'm not gonna lie. Also, I really love the descriptions of Italy, and it made it that much more fun that I was actually in Italy while reading it. Like, I loved her explanations for the country, like her descriptions of Italian places, but also the Italian language. I loved seeing the Italian sentences, of course, and I also loved her descriptions of the Italian food. So I do feel like, even though she did not do the characters well, in my opinion, I do think that she did the setting and everything that came with that. I think she did that beautifully. Also, their meet cute was hilarious. Like, I laughed out loud while reading that. Like, it was very funny. So having said all that, this is my first Karina Halle. I don't think it will be my last, because there are some books of hers that are pretty high up on my TBR, and one of them is set in Spain and the other one is set in Norway. So I do think I will read them. Hopefully she'll do the characters in both those books better than this one. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, but it does have a pretty high average rating. A lot of people do seem to love it, so don't let me deter you from reading that. But these, I just had big issues, and once I saw them, I could not look past them. Moving on to the 3.5 star, and I had one 3.5 star, and was Ruthless Stranger by Maggie Cole. Another book I read for the Mafia Romance Readathon, and this is the first book in her Mafia War series. You follow Aspen and Maxim, and Aspen has been married for 20 years and she recently got divorced, I believe. Yeah, so her ex-husband was a dick. So he basically mooched off her for all those 20 years. He used her money to pay for his new girlfriend's boobs, and then he left her for said girlfriend. So she's done with him. They divorced, and now her friends want to take her to Vegas for like a girls trip and to make her forget about everything that happened. So she reluctantly agrees, and while in Vegas, they're by the pool and she's discussing that she's not really interested in dating men again, but what she is interested in is she does have this fantasy of having sex with an anonymous man and have, like, basically she wants to be blindfolded and fucked and then basically just leave at the end of the night. And Maxim overhears her saying that, and he approaches her friend saying that he can provide that service for her. So they, after doing their due diligence, checking him out, one of them takes his wallet, saying that if anything happens to their friend, she will take his wallet straight to the police. So they arrange this for her, and they have this magical night together. Then they actually decide to do it the second night as well, and then they leave. But then she actually works for the city, and she's in charge of zoning, and he is from this very powerful Russian family that has ties to the mafia, but they're not mafia themselves. And he wants this building. He needs something from like the zoning commission. And that's why they see each other again. She immediately recognizes his voice, and obviously he knows who she is since he was not blindfolded. And now they decide to go for it and be in a relationship. So this was a very fun read. It was very hot, and I actually flew through it. Like, especially their first night together was very, very hot. I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the books in the series because there are some books that I'm very, very intrigued by. Like I think she did a wonderful job setting up other books in this series. The reason this was 3.5 is that this couple was just not my favorite. This was once again the worst case of insta-love ever. I'm not lying when I say that they basically told each other that they loved each other after 2 days. And I'm sorry, this one hot night does not count. And even if we did count it, then they said they loved each other after 4 days. Like, that is way too soon for me, and not necessary since this book had 400 pages. Like, she could have stretched that out a little bit. And in fact, it was proven in this book when, like, towards the end, something is revealed about her father, and he's like, oh, I didn't know all that. And I'm like, duh. Like, you never really spent any time getting to know her before, like, basically moving in with each other. And as much as I appreciated that this book had older characters, she was 38 and he was a 46, I do have to say she felt very, very immature to me. And I guess a part of that could be explained that she was with her ex-boyfriend ever since she was 18, so she never really matured in, like, the relationship department. But either the author should have clarified that, but also, like, to me, that's not an excuse because 38 is old enough to know that you should not behave that way. Because of her behavior, things unfolded that are probably going to have long-term consequences and things we're going to see in other books. And I'm like, that is something like a 20-year-old would do, not a 38-year-old, like almost 40-year-old woman. So that, I mean, it's not like I found her unlikable, but I did really, like, I rolled my eyes and I was very disappointed in her behavior. Also, this is a nitpicky thing, but to me it didn't feel that way because he had this nickname for her, a Russian nickname, which was cute. And I do like nicknames, especially if they're like a different language, like Sign Me Up. He constantly kept calling her by that name. Like, every single time he mentioned her, he talked about her or talked to her, he constantly kept using that nickname. I looked it up. It was like it was 149 times that he used that nickname. And I do think, like, I don't know, I haven't counted it, but I think he used her actual name like only a handful of times. Like, I truly think it was only 5 times that he used her actual name, and the other times he only used the nickname, and I just don't like that. It just got on my nerves. But having said that, I did enjoy her writing style, and I know for sure that some of the other books in the series will not be insta-love because they've already been introduced to each other in this book. So if it's gonna be insta-love, it's not as insta-lovey as this one because we've already seen interactions of them. So at least it's not gonna feel that insta-lovey to me. Moving on to the 4-star books. I had 3 4 stars. The first one was Bound by Duty by Cora Reilly. So this is the second book in her Born in Blood Chronicles, and I actually read the first book in 2021, and it has been years since I continued. A part of me wanted to read the first book, reread the first book, or read the first book in the male character's point of view, but actually I'm glad I didn't do that because this book follows the Chicago Mafia, whereas the first book followed the New York Mafia. So you don't have to necessarily read the first book in order to read this one. This book, you follow Dante and Valentina, and Dante is the capo of the Chicago Mafia, and his wife died 4 years ago. Since he's recently become the capo, he needs a wife and an heir. She was also married, and her husband died a year ago, and now they have to get married. What Dante doesn't know is that she's actually a virgin, because her first husband was gay and he actually had a boyfriend and everything, and they never consummated that marriage. So she thinks, even though she's really not looking forward to getting married again, she is looking forward to finally being with somebody who does find her attractive, or at least if he's not gonna actually love her, because she does know that he used to love his wife very, very much, then at least she's gonna have a physical relationship with him. But on their wedding night, he actually shows her around the house, he shows her his bedroom, and then once they lie down, he turns around and just sleeps and doesn't touch her. And then it's going to be her mission in life to seduce her husband. I actually enjoyed this book more than I thought I would, actually, because I do know that Dante, like, especially in the Cora Chronicles, he is the antagonist. So part of me was like, am I gonna like him? Because I do know that the Cora Chronicles is a lot of people's favorite books in Cora Reilly's universe. But I did enjoy Dante, and I did enjoy Valentina. Like, I thought they suited each other very well. I do have to say, Valentina, as much as she did put her foot down at times, she was a pushover at other times. Usually had to do with the same thing. Like, one day she would put her foot down, but then once he talks to her about it, she easily relents, which I wanted her to have a little bit of a backbone. Also, the way the gay characters were portrayed in this book made me a little bit uncomfortable, but I do have to say this book was written in 2015, so I do think or hope that if she were to write this book now, she would have handled that a little bit differently. Also, Dante, even though this technically they do have a second book, it did bother me that he never really tells her that he loves her when it's clear that he does. I do have to say, it has been like about a week since I read it, and I have already really forgotten a lot about this book and about this couple, so that is really why it's 4 stars. I would still recommend it, but I am very much looking forward to other books in this series, mainly Bound by Hatred, which is the next book. That book was already very well set up in the first book, but especially in this book too. My goal is to hopefully finish this series and maybe start and finish the Cora Chronicles this year. Moving on to Broken Whispers by Neva Altaj, which once again I read for the Mafia Romance Readathon. This book is the second book in her Perfectly Imperfect series, and I actually started with this one because I heard from a lot of people that they preferred this book over the first one, so I figured let's just give myself the best odds of enjoying it by reading the second book, and you can definitely do that without having read the other one. This book you follow Mikhail and Bianca, and Mikhail has been going to this ballet performance every week, and he's been mesmerized by this ballet dancer. Every time he goes to the performance, he leaves her a single rose. He's part of the Bratva, and one day his Pacan, who's actually the hero from the first book, tells his men that the Italian mafia princess is up for an arranged marriage. And once he finds out who it is, it's actually his ballet dancer, he tells everybody that she's his and he wants to marry her. He is a scarred hero, and his Pacan actually is very surprised that he's willing to do this because he never really showed any interest in falling in love or having a real relationship. He usually, once he has sex, but it's basically like clothing is removed only as far enough to do the deed. Basically, they're basically fully clothed and only the body parts necessary to use in the act are exposed, basically. He also wears an eye patch. Bianca is the mafia princess, and she basically hates her father, and she's a speechless heroine. She had an accident years ago, and after that she has been speechless, so she uses sign language, and they actually get married. He thinks that she finds him revolting just like everybody else, but she's actually very intrigued by him. He also is a single dad, and she actually bonds with the daughter too. I really loved the characters. I really loved the little girl too, and I loved seeing him be a father to her and ultimately seeing her being a mother to her. And obviously I really love the concept of this series being a mafia series, but with characters with being neurodivergent or with disabilities. I flew through this book, like I read it in a day, and it was on a day where I was very, very tired, so her writing is very easy to get to. I do have to say, I wish this book was a little bit longer. It was only a little bit over 200 pages, and that made it so it was a little bit surface level. Like, I think she could have done way more if she had given herself 50 or 100 pages more. And I do think like she could have gone more in depth with the characters and their backstories, but also created a little bit more angst in the romance, because since this book was so short, she did have to go through things a little bit faster. So that meaning that their struggles also didn't last too long. So that this book is a little bit graphic. because of his job. So he's basically the torturer of the Bratva, and you do actually see him torture a few people. And I really didn't think, like, I have read a couple other mafia books in the past, and they never really went into so much detail. So I would say keep that in mind when you pick this book up. It did take me aback a little bit. I do really see why a lot of people love this book, and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, it was 4 stars. It was my favorite book I read for the Mafia Romance Readathon. This hero was definitely possessive, touch her and I'll kill you vibes for sure, and also a tortured hero, which you guys know I really love tortured heroes. This was definitely a Beauty and the Beast retelling of sorts, and I love those. The next book in the series was very well set up, and I cannot wait to read this one, and I actually cannot wait to read a lot of books in this series. And my last and favorite 4-star read was King of Sloth by Anna Huang. So this is the 4th book in her Kings of Sin series, and every book follows a hero who embodies a different sin, and of course this book is Sloth. You follow Xavier and Sloane, and they have been set up ever since the 2nd book. Although I don't know, for right now I'm reading the 1st book. Actually, maybe they've already, but I don't think so. I think he starts to be her client in the 2nd book. Basically, she's a PR agent, and he's her client. And basically his father hired her to keep him in check because he's a trust fund baby. He is very lazy, and he constantly has these lavish parties and constantly gets into trouble. Eventually, actually, his father dies, and the stipulation in his will is that he'll inherit $7 billion, but only if he's CEO of something. His father has set up this panel to determine whether or not he's a good CEO, and one of the people on the panel is Sloane. They actually end up falling in love, of course, and he sets up his own company. This book has a lot of cameos from a lot of Anna's books. So obviously a lot of people from the Kings of Sin series make an appearance, but also a lot of people from the Twisted series make an appearance. So that is very fun, like a lot of different Easter eggs. There's a couple scenes with Alex actually in this book. I did enjoy this book, like I said, but it's not my favorite in her series. I do, like I said, let me just talk about things I did love. I really loved Xavier. I love how fast and hard he fell for Sloane, and how he was very clear from the beginning that he found her attractive and that he wanted more from her. I also really enjoyed her as a character. I love that she was like this ice queen. I loved, like, if you really love The Holiday and you love the plot line of Cameron Diaz not being able to cry, then you're really gonna like this heroine because she has the same thing. Once again, this book sets up the next 2 books Anna's writing very, very well. She sets up The Striker very well, and she sets up King of Envy very well, so cannot wait to read both those books. I do have to say, the reason this is 4 stars and not 5 stars is this did feel a little bit too long for me. So this is the longest book in the series at over 430 pages, and I didn't think this was justified, especially since I felt like King of Greed, which is my favorite book in the series, was too short. Like, I would have 100% preferred 50 pages from this book go into that book. Like, there was a big chunk in here where, yes, their relationship was moving forward, I guess. Like, I'm talking about the whole part in Spain. That, to me, was not really necessary, honestly. Or it should have been a little bit shorter. Also, I don't think this couple will stick with me long term. In fact, I already know it's not, because I read this book at the beginning of the month, and I really haven't been thinking about them at all. In fact, I've been thinking about Alessandra and Dominic way more than Xavier and Sloane. Also, and this is very much personal preference, billionaire romances, like, on its own, are not really my favorite trope. So I really loved King of Greed because of the reason that, yes, he was a billionaire, but the fact that he's a billionaire is what got them in the place where they were at, meaning that if he wanted to change things, he had to woo his wife again without throwing money at her. Whereas in this book, this is the type of billionaire that it's just not my favorite. Like, he is a trust fund baby. He's the type of billionaire trust fund babies that are just not really my favorite. Even though I did, like, he was a nice guy and I did enjoy him. But he's also the type of hero that constantly keeps throwing money at his problems, which is just is not interesting to me. There's less stakes that way. Like, I would have preferred him solving his issues without constantly throwing money at them. But once again, like I said, that's personal preference. I know a lot of people really love, like, the lavish heroes, lavish rich heroes that constantly keep throwing money around, but that is just not my thing. So 4 stars, I did enjoy it. Anna Huang is one of my favorite authors, so of course I'm gonna read everything this woman writes. I am very much looking forward to the sports romance that's gonna come out in September. Now for the 4.5 stars, the first one is Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase. So this book, when I first finished it, I actually gave it 5 stars, but after a couple days, I changed my rating to 4.5 stars. This book, you follow Jessica and Sebastian, the Marquess of Dane. She has this brother who's not very smart, who's gripped in the clutches of the Marquess of Dane. Basically, the Marquess of Dane is a scoundrel. He constantly keeps gambling and having sex with prostitutes and basically just being a rake and a scoundrel. And her brother is in his friend group and he is trying to keep up with him. But since he's not as smart as the Marquess of Dane, he constantly keeps losing money. And Jessica goes to Paris with her grandmother to save her brother. But instead, she falls into the arms of the Marquess of Dane. They have this banter going on. He finds her, he's very intrigued by her. She's obviously very smart and she can hold her own against him. They basically end up in a compromising situation, and he's always said that he's not gonna get married, and especially not to this, like, to a lady. Eventually, he does care about her, so eventually he does end up married to her, and it's basically their romance. So he is a tortured hero. His father was awful and his mother left him when he was 8 years old to travel to another country with her lover, and he basically has never really felt love from anybody. So being with her, he finally knows what that feels like to be loved. This is another Italian hero, and he woos her and seduces her by speaking Italian to her, which, swoon! So yeah, like I said, it's 4.5 stars, mainly because I had issues with this writing style, because I felt like she constantly kept using very, very difficult words that I had issues with, which, yes, technically English is not my first language because my first language is Dutch, but I have been reading English books for years upon years upon years. I rarely have to look up words, and if I have to look up a word in a book, it's usually just one. With this book, I constantly had to look up words because I didn't understand what they meant. And it's not because this is a historical romance either, because I have read plenty of historical romances where I didn't have to do that. So that made me give it 4.5 stars. I do have to say, I do think that once I reread this book, this will be 5 stars, because at that point I already know what this book is about, and I probably don't have to interrupt myself as many times to look up words. I really, really loved both characters, but especially Jessica. She was such a strong heroine. She was such a smart heroine. I really loved the fact that she held her own. And I just love how perceptive she was. On the one hand, she didn't take things lying down, but on the other hand, she knew when he was lashing out because of his issues and because he was so emotionally suppressed. I appreciated that because since she was so headstrong, she made things clear when they needed to be made clear, but then she was soft and softening towards him when she knew that he was just lashing out because of his past. Also, there's a plotline in here where he has a bastard son, and the way she handled that made me just want to give her a standing ovation. What a strong, sweet, beautiful woman she is. Of course he was gonna fall in love with her, because I truly don't see a universe where somebody would not fall in love with her. Also, once again, I've told you many a times that I really love emotionally suppressed heroes and kind of heroes that are dicks, and he's exactly that. And I love how he truly changes for her, how eventually he does, he almost is begging her on his knees, trying to get her to not leave him, that I really loved watching him fall in love with her. And like I said, I just loved him speaking in Italian to her. And I really loved how he was like, I'm gonna ruin her, and at the end of the day, she's the one who ruined him. Love that. And I really love this book. I can definitely see why it's so beloved. This was published in 1995, and I've read it almost 30 years later. Whoa, 30 years. 30 years later, and I do think it still holds up. Of course, there are things in here that don't necessarily hold up, like the way he talks about women is obviously it's not nice. So that is really of the times, but those things really didn't bother me. I do think that anybody that reads this can enjoy it, and I'm very, very glad that I read this because this has been on my TBR for a very long time. My last 4.5 stars is The Veiled Kingdom by Renee. So this book I read for my vlog of reading new release fantasy romances, and in this book you follow Naira, and she's a princess of this kingdom, and its king is a very brutal one. There's this rebellion that infiltrated the castle a year ago, and in the confusion of that raid, she left and she's been living on the street ever since. And then one day she actually gets imprisoned, and she gets imprisoned with another rebel person. And when her brother rescues her, she begs him to take Naira with, and he does. And this man is Dacre, who is the son of the rebellion leader. And she has a rebel tattoo and immediately notices that it's a fake one. So he calls her Little Traitor. And while she's at their veiled kingdom, he's in charge of her training, because this is a world full of fae and she doesn't have powers, which is unheard of, and it's actually one of the reasons why her father has been torturing her. So of course they fall in love. This book I inhaled, like I flew through this book. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed both characters. I enjoyed like their romance, even though technically it's not a romance yet. It's basically just like lust filled, but I really enjoyed their interactions together. I thoroughly enjoyed myself while reading this book. And I do have to say, if I was just rating this based on enjoyment, this would 100% be a 5-star read. But I did have issues with the plot, mainly the world building. Like the world building was non-existent, and that is basically the reason why this is 4.5 stars. Having said that, I did enjoy the characters, especially the hero. Like he was a dick, but I definitely did enjoy him. I like his type of asshole. I did enjoy that the heroine was very strong, and the smutty scenes, even though they were very hot, and I did enjoy them. By the end, I did feel like she just had a list that she was like, okay, the hero has to say this, the hero has to do this, and she was chucking it off, which at the end kind of took me a little bit out of the story. Having said all that, I did think that she executed the characters, the smutty scenes, the romance very well. I would recommend it, but not if you really like world building in your fantasies or fantasy romances, because then you're not gonna love this. If you're just in it for a fun, quick, smutty, good time, then definitely pick this one up. My only 5-star is a weird one because it's a fan fiction and it's So Lorcan Did. Okay, so basically I'm currently rereading Kingdom of Ash for the first time. And there's one of my favorite couples in that series are Lorcan and Elide. They started being a couple in the previous book. And like I said, I love them, and I've always loved them. And I was like, I'm not gonna lie, I was looking forward to their couple, like them having sex for the first time I read Kingdom of Ash. And then we never got to see that. The only thing we read about them having sex was So Lorcan Did. So on the first time, obviously, I didn't look up fanfiction because I read it when it came out and I didn't really think about it. But now my reread, since I'm reading more fanfictions now, I just looked up. I was like, okay, so Lorcan did fanfiction. And there were 2 that I found, and I read both of them. I read one by Throne of ASSS and Love Me Some Lorcan. And like both only were like 15 pages, and it was just them giving us in detail what Lorcan did to Elide. I do have to say my favorite of the 2 is Love Me Some Lorcan, so I'd highly recommend it. Obviously it's not canon, but in my head it is, because I just feel like we were robbed of a good smutty scene, because I know Sarah J. Maas can do smutty scenes because we've seen it in Throne of Glass. So I still feel like we were robbed, and part of me wishes that she would one day write a bonus chapter of just So Lorcan Did scene. So I figured since that doesn't exist, let me just read some fan fiction. And I gave both of them 5 stars simply because they executed the assignment perfectly. So yeah, that was, I guess, my favorite thing I read, because it did satisfy my craving of watching Lorcan and Elide have sex. So I know that is a weird one, but I mean, I did read it, so I did want to tell you about it. So those were all the books that I read for the first half of May. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. Also, I would really love to know what your favorite book was that you read so far this month. I would say out of the full-length novels that I read, The Veiled Kingdom is definitely my favorite so far. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know by leaving a like if you did, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.